Jimmy Bassett.
Well, we don't know that one. Right, yeah.
Are you going to announce
That's right.
for the kids to pick up the door right here?
Yeah.
Not really.
Hey. 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 There we go. We're getting there. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. As you can tell, I brought up a different stool that has a back on it so I can get more comfortable because it's going to be a long one. Whenever the kids are finished and want to go down, just follow Miss Heather. She'll head down and lead that way. The teens are going to go up as well, so whenever you guys are ready, just meet over there at the door and do that. We're still searching for a place for you, okay? Okay, so here's how I want to start. I know, and I'm going to say this again this coming Sunday. I want to apologize because I know that I've been asking you to drink from a fire hose when it comes to this stuff. That's part of the reason that I've kind of done 2 Sundays and a Wednesday talking about the same kind of stuff, but just from different angles. Because I know that this is asking most of us to look through a lens that we've never seen through. This is brand new information, and I get that, and that can be difficult to process, difficult to kind of get through. And so I'm trying to make sure that we really cover that stuff before we actually get into the text and start moving forward in the text, because we kind of need that baseline, that foundation for this view. Now, as I said, and as I'm going to continue to say every single time we get together, I am not trying to say that this is the only way to look at Revelation. I'm not trying to say that all the other ways are wrong. or any of that kind of stuff. This was just the one that made the most sense to me. I fully understand that I'm not in charge of this. God is. God's in charge of how everything's going to go down and when everything's going to go down. In the meantime, I feel like even if we just look at this view just for a few weeks, I feel like we can get something out of it. Even if you don't continue to use this view of Revelation, that's okay. If we are in Jesus Christ, then we'll all find out together what's going to happen, okay? So, if you look in your folder, there is like a little half-sheet card, okay? There should be one, what?
We're missing some papers that we ran out and some other papers. We have extra.
Oh, okay. Well, if anybody that has extra papers, raise your hand. Because I kind of figured we were going to get there. Like there are some tables that have like 20 people sitting around them, and then some tables that have like 2. So, all right, we got. Yeah, if we can start spreading out. Raise your hand. How about let's do this? Raise your hand if you need some papers. Let's do that. Raise your hand if you need papers. Not those kind of papers, Joyce. All right, so if you take a look at this half-sheet cardstock thing here, this is intended to be something that you can stick in your Bible in Revelation. It would be most helpful there, and just use it during these next few weeks, and you can continue to hang on to it after you want, or you can burn it when we're done. It doesn't matter. So this is just an explanation of the apocalyptic literature stuff that we've been talking about. So on one side, it just explains, what apocalyptic literature basically is, when it was written, when it was popular, some other examples of apocalyptic literature, and how that relates to to how we can possibly understand Revelation. Okay, so that's one side. The other side is a list, a very long list of things that you would find in apocalyptic writings. Okay, so this would be any of those books on the other side, like Apocalypse of Zephaniah, 1st Enoch, 2nd Enoch, 2nd Baruch, all that. Even when you look in Daniel, Ezekiel, some of Joel, Old Testament books, you can see these kinds of things. Well, we also know that we see them in Revelation, right? Because a lot of these things are what makes Revelation very confusing for a lot of us. All right, so let's run down through this list. So if you were to look at a piece of apocalyptic literature, whether that's Revelation or not, you're going to see them talking about having visions, right? So whether it was in a dream or they just suddenly had a vision and all that kind of stuff. So that is a common theme that you will see in apocalyptic literature. All right. Again, we're just talking about what commonalities do we see between Revelation and other apocalyptic writings. The triumph of God, because God has always won and will always win, and so in apocalyptic literature, that's kind of the point. That's the whole point, is that in the end, God is going to win like he always has. All right? Shaking of the foundations, like earthquakes and things like that. Battle of good versus evil. And so, whether you're looking in Revelation or other apocalyptic writings, you're going to see, descriptions of battles and things like that. You'll see prediction of things that are coming up. Angels, trumpets. And we also know in Revelation we see 7 bowls, 7 trumpets, 7 seals, right? You see a vision of heaven and hell. They actually, they describe those. Then you've got symbolism. Now, in apocalyptic literature, okay, again, set Revelation aside for a minute. In apocalyptic literature, the sea represents forces of evil or chaos. And the way that I've heard this described is a few different things. One, if you read through Genesis, where God is creating everything, it kind of starts out by saying the earth was formless and void, empty, and darkness over the deep. So basically it's saying there was a lot of sea, right? And so the sea, there was this chaos. Well, then God brought order out of that. He brought up the land. So where once there was chaos, he brought order. and then he made creation and all that other kind of stuff. So it's that kind of language that is used in apocalyptic literature, that whenever you see the sea, it is representing basically where evil would come from, where it would originate from, chaos, things like that. You also got to think, at the time that this was being written, they had ways of navigating the sea, but they weren't the best, right? I mean, if they got stuck out in a storm, they're not coming back, typically back then. So the sea, is that, and that's a big deal. If you read through Revelation, you're going to see where it'll talk about the sea is churning. It'll talk about, that there was a dragon coming up out of the sea. There's a part where it says that the sea was still and calm like glass. Okay? Can anybody guess what that might mean if it says the sea was still and calm like glass? What's one thing that might come to your mind? Just right off the top of your head, something that might come to your mind when you think about the sea going from being crazy at the beginning of Revelation to still and calm. When Jesus said, "Quiet, be still," right? So, if you think about it from the point of apocalyptic literature, if the sea is the place where evil comes from, like it comes up out of the sea, and whenever the sea is churning, that means there's evil going on. Evil is working, it's doing things, it's chaos is happening, okay? Then all of a sudden, the sea, if you can even imagine standing on the shore where the tide is never stopped, right? It just constantly comes in. Imagine that just suddenly being still. And there being no tide, no waves, nothing. And so the idea being, at that point in Revelation, the idea is that there will be a time when evil will be silenced. Okay? Notice it's not, at that point in Revelation, the sea is still there, but it's silent. Later on in Revelation, it talks about heaven, and it says there is no sea. And a lot of people get confused by that, and they're just like, wait a minute, why wouldn't we have the sea? If we're supposed to be a new earth, and what's so wrong with the sea? Well, if you're reading it through apocalyptic lenses, that's why there's no sea, is because there is now no longer a place for evil to hide or live or come from. There's no longer any chaos. There's no natural disasters, killing people, things like that. And so if the sea goes from chaotic to still to gone, that's showing you the process of what's going to happen. So the view that I like to use is that right now the sea is churning, and we can all see this. We don't have to look very far to see evil happening, right? There's evil all around, and not just evil, but there's also natural disasters. There are natural things in our world that cause death and harm, right? So we can look all around and we can see that. When Jesus suddenly comes, right? We're doing whatever, and all of a sudden, boom, here he is. The sky rolls back like a scroll. Everybody sees it, and everybody knows exactly what's happening. Here's Jesus. At that point, it says every knee will bow in heaven and on earth, right? So, that means good or bad. Even the people who right now are so vehemently against God, right? The people who would love to do anything they could possibly do to kill God's people, there are lots of those all over the world. We don't see them a lot in America. We don't hear about it a lot in America, but they're all over the world. Even those people will bow the knee when Jesus returns. When he comes, every single knee will bow, and every force of evil will silence. The same way that Jesus, being in the boat, said, "Peace, be still," and everything obeyed him. In the same way that he went to demons that were in somebody, right? Somebody's possessed by a demon. Jesus could have a conversation with them, but when he said, "Get out," they obeyed. They didn't argue. They didn't say, "Hang on, let's discuss this for a minute." They immediately obeyed, just like the storm did when he said, "Peace, be still." And so when Jesus returns, suddenly the sky rolls back like a scroll, and all evil is immediately silenced. Then will come the judgment and the destruction of evil. All right, moving on. You see stars that often represent angels. You see beasts that often represent nations or specific people, and we'll get into that. You see horns that represent kings. There are two types of crowns that you see in apocalyptic literature. There's the Stephanos, which is made of leaves and it denotes victory. And then there's the diadema, which is a king's crown. Two types of crowns, and you have to be able to read it from, like in the Greek, to see those. But anyway, so then there's the symbolic use of numbers. Okay? Raise your hand if you're a numbers person, if you like numbers. Not a couple, there's got to be more than that. It's like two people raising it. God, I know there's the numbers people are out there. I know you are. Don't be afraid. All right, so the number 2 represents, if you know anything about about the Old Testament, about God's law, and it says that there have to be 2 valid witnesses, right, for a crime. So there's the valid witnesses. Well, then Jesus tells the disciples to go out 2 by 2 to be witnesses for him. They have witnessed what Jesus did. They need to go out 2 by 2 and tell people about it, right? God and man working together is another way to interpret in apocalyptic literature. And remember, apocalyptic literature was a style of literature that was written first by Jews, then by Christians from around 100 BC to 100 AD. Okay? And so Jews were writing this, and they're using the number 2 where it means God and man working together, and then the same thing goes with Christians. God and man working together, okay? Moving on, the number 3 represents God pretty much all the time, or some kind of deity, okay? That's kind of a little caveat in there, but it's basically a godly number, okay? We a lot of times want to think that 7 is a godly number. We're going to get to that, but 3 in apocalypse, I'm going to have to start coming up with a shorter way to say that word. It's going to take a half an hour to do it. So 3 in that type of literature is usually meaning God. And so for Jews, they're thinking of, as you read through the Old Testament, and especially when you get to Daniel and things like that, the angels are saying, holy, holy, holy. And there's a reason that it's said 3 times like that. And so the Jews were it's like saying it 3 times means that there's no doubt about it, if that makes sense. Well, so then apocalyptic literature comes along and they take that number 3, and, because the Jews don't believe in the Trinity, right? Because the Messiah hasn't come, they think, right? And then the Holy Spirit, it's God. There's one God, right? So, they don't really do the whole Trinity thing, but then Christians picked it up and they were like, hey, this number 3 thing works for God in another way. Because we understand there's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Okay? That's number 3. Number 4 represents creation. And if you look in like Daniel and Ezekiel, you'll read about these 4 living creatures, these 4 beings that they were crazy looking, they had a head of this and wings of that and arms of that, and, all that kind of stuff. Like there's some crazy looking creatures. There's 4 of them. It represents all of creation. Okay? Number 5 fingers or a handful. We talked about that already. Number 6 is incomplete, right? It is a counterfeit deity. Okay? So it's something that is incomplete, because 7 is complete in only the way that God can make it complete, right? It's a godly completeness. God sets it ahead of time and says, this, what I have created, is complete, right? God doesn't create anything that's incomplete. What he creates is complete, and then he gives us the freedom to make ourselves incomplete if we want to, right? So God makes something complete, whether that's the 7 days of the week or whatever. So 7 means complete, so 1 less than that is incomplete. And that is not of God, right? If God is the only one who can make things complete, because anything we make is always going to be flawed. It's always going to have some kind of flaw to it, right? Because we can't possibly make something perfect or complete. And so essentially what we make would be like 6, because it's not quite there. Number 10 is kind of like 7. 7 and 10 are kind of alike in the fact that it means completeness, but it means a predetermined amount. And this is something that you'll see as we get into studying Revelation. We start seeing the number 10 representing a predetermined amount, meaning that God established ahead of time, way before anything ever happened, way before anything started. God already had set aside, this is how long this is going to happen, or this is how many of this is going to be whatever. So the whole idea being that God is definitely in control. He has predetermined ahead of time, like the amount of time that we're going to be on the earth. He knows the end, okay? We don't. And so then 10 or a multiple of 10 means kind of a completeness, the whole thing, not part of it. One of the ways I like to think about it is if I walked up to you and I handed you a pie plate and it only had half the pie in it, okay? If I came over to you and I gave you a pie plate that only had half the pie in it, first of all, most of you wouldn't be surprised. Secondly, you would know, you would assume that there is another half of the pie somewhere, right? You would look at that and say, this is not the whole pie, right? You wouldn't look at that and say, oh, he must have baked it that way, right? You would look at it and say, it was baked as a whole pie and it's coming to me as half a pie. There's something missing here, okay? I'm going to use that analogy again later. Don't worry. The number 10 can also refer to 2 handfuls or meaning a lot. But once again, in apocalyptic literature, it does not mean necessarily all. And that's important. It can mean a lot, but not all. And that's very important. All right, number 12 means God's people, 12 tribes, 12 apostles. We get that, makes sense. Multiples of these numbers typically represent a fullness of that, right? Or the complete number of that. So, I mentioned this last time, I think it was, 144,000. In order to get to that, you've got 12 times 12, it's 144. Well, 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. 144 times 1,000, 144,000. So it's like a whole bunch of multiplications. But the idea is that it's everybody. Like, we would kind of look at that and go, aren't you being redundant? You know, couldn't you just say all? But that's the style. That's the apocalyptic style. That's what they did. They like to use numbers in a very symbolic and poetic way to communicate what they're trying to communicate. I did hear one time, and I'm not entirely sure how true this is, but I've heard it and I could see it being possible, that the reason John used this style to write Revelation and send it on is because he was in prison, right? He's on an island. He's been exiled because of his faith and because he's been preaching about Jesus. They're monitoring everything he sends out, and so if he sends out something that the Romans wouldn't understand, then they'll be like, oh, this guy's crazy, send it on, who cares, right? So if he sends it out in something that only Jews and Christians would understand, you know. So I've heard that. I'm not entirely sure how true that is. Anyway, 1,000 years, okay? This is one it's going to lead us to this piece of paper, which has your different views on it. Premillennialism, amillennialism, okay? So 1,000 years in apocalyptic literature usually means forever. Okay? Think of it like you're a kid, right? Like if a kid was just like, there were 1,000 bugs, right? They don't really know how many bugs there were. They just know that there was a lot of bugs, right? And it was more than they could possibly count. And they felt like they were being completely surrounded by bugs, and they just used the number 1,000. It's kind of like that, but it's a little more, it has a little more intent behind it in apocalyptic literature, so that 1,000 means forever. And here's where it gets fun. It could also mean a set amount of time. It gets kind of weird, but it could mean either one of those, and you kind of have to read it in context of, especially when we're talking about Revelation, you have to read it in context with the rest of the Bible, right? So 1,000 could mean forever, or it could mean a predetermined amount of time, but a very long one, right? Just like a kid saying 1,000 bugs, right? It's, a very long time. Well, then, if you think about 1,000 as multiples of 10, and if 10 means a handful or a lot, but then you have 3 tens multiplied together to get 1,000, that's basically a God-determined amount of time that is a lot. Okay? So either that or forever. I know it gets a little confusing, but once we start getting into it, it'll make a little more sense. Now, let's move over here to our this sheet that has the different views: premillennialism, amillennialism, all that. All right, what I've been listening. Folks have been coming up and kind of giving me some feedback, which I definitely appreciate, because as I'm up here trying to communicate this stuff, sometimes I can tell that it's landing, sometimes I can tell that it's not landing, and I appreciate it when people come up and they're like, "Hey, I'm not really getting this part," or you're really confusing me, whatever. So I want to make sure that we can, as best we can, try to all get on the same page. Okay, so. Premillennialism is the view that most people grew up with in America. I say in America on purpose because I personally believe that premillennialism is an American view of Revelation. And I'll get to that in a second. So, premillennialism is the view that was used when they wrote the Left Behind books, and then of course then it became movies. It's the view that you've probably heard most often. And one of the things that strikes me about premillennialism is it's very movie-like. So the idea is that we're just going along right now, and of course, while we're just having life and we're just kind of waiting on what happens next, there's some really suave guy somewhere who's a politician who raises up and he gets a lot of people to believe in him. And then everybody turns to him believing that and there have been many, many politicians in our history, especially in America, that people thought was the guy I'm talking about. Well, he raises all these people up to kind of surround him, and he becomes very suave and all this kind of stuff. Then there's the rapture. So there's, we're just going along, we're having life, and you're at work with your coworkers. All of a sudden, you disappear. Your coworkers are standing there and go, "Wait a second. Where'd you go?" Right? So there's that. And then begins the 7 years of tribulation. That guy who was very suave kind of came up and he got all these followers around him, and everybody was just like, "Oh, this guy's the greatest thing in the world." Then the tribulation happens. Well, this guy just kind of leads everybody into all the tribulation. And when they say tribulation, I mean it's like really all the terrible things that could possibly happen all happen within the span of 7 years, 7 literal years. And it's just awful. You just don't want to be here for it. Depending on who you ask, during that 7-year tribulation, to some people, let me try to figure out how to phrase this. There are some people who believe that people can come to faith in Jesus Christ during the 7-year tribulation. There are others who think that once the rapture happens, it's too late. Okay? I'm just saying that there's that difference in views. So you get through the 7 years of tribulation. Then Jesus comes back. So Jesus comes, this is his second coming, and we all come with him. And so then there's this big army, right? So it's like this heavenly army. Well, also at the same time, that suave guy that got everybody to believe in him, he's now developed his army around him, and he led everybody through this tribulation time and proved himself to be the Antichrist throughout the tribulation time. And so then when Jesus comes back with his army, now you've got the Antichrist with his army, and there's going to be some giant battle, okay? And so you've got this huge battle of Armageddon, and ultimately Satan gets destroyed because God's always going to win. And then that's also going to be a really tough time for it says tribulation saints and Old Testament believers raised. But anyway, so then you get to the millennium, okay? This is the 1,000 years. During this millennium, Satan is actually imprisoned, okay? He's put in prison, and Jesus sits on a literal throne in Jerusalem, okay? And he sits there and he rules the entire world, okay? From that throne, literally, okay? This earth, this one, he's ruling it literally for 1,000 years. And then you get to the end of 1,000 years, then Satan is let loose again, and that one people have a hard time with. They're like, wait a second, why Why are we doing this? Why? You just had him in jail. Why is God letting him loose again? So God lets him loose, and then there's the judgment, like the final judgment. And then at that point, Satan is destroyed, all evil is destroyed, and then is eternity. Okay? That's premillennialism. Now, as I said, I personally feel that that is an American view because, and here's why. Because we don't really understand what tribulation means in this country. There are Christians right now who are really fearing for their life, but they're not actually afraid, okay? Because they know that if a certain person finds out that they're a Christian, they'll be drug out in the street and shot, their family will be killed in North Africa, China, in Iran, okay? So there are places all over this world where Christianity is against the law and it's punishable by death. That has always been the case since Jesus died, right? So Stephen being the first martyr in Acts, and then at that point, we see that people then had a bloodthirst for Christians, and they start going after Christians. It has not stopped since then. There have been periods in certain areas where it was good, right? You can read throughout history and know that in one area where Christianity was like against the law and it was punishable by death, then somebody comes along and kind of gets into power and Christianity comes up, and then the Catholic Church gets to take over at this point, and then over here, and you can kind of read that throughout history depending on the place you live. Well, America is very young, right? Yeah, it's my wife's. I recognize the ringtone. So here in America, we are a very young country. We're also a very blessed country. This country was founded on the Bible. And so there is such a thing as the Bible Belt, or used to be, where basically everybody generally kind of went to church, at least on Easter and Christmas. Everybody generally knew who God is, who Jesus is, generally knew something, right? And so here in America, we've not had to experience that kind of persecution yet. There may come a time where we do, or hopefully Jesus comes back before then, but we've not had to experience that. So when it comes to our way of looking at Revelation, and it talks about some of these awful, terrible, horrible things, it makes sense why we would look at that and go, that's clearly talking about something that hasn't happened yet. And it would also cause us to look at Revelation and try to see it in our context, in our culture, and we try to see it through our politicians, right? We try to place them in the holes, right? Of, oh, well, that guy clearly must be the Antichrist. Or we'll look, around and we'll be like, oh, I remember back in the 80s there was this one guy, and that's kind of what's happened. That view has kind of caused that. Has caused people to think and assume that they can figure it out. That they can figure out when it's all going to happen. So if I can look around and I'll be like, well, clearly that guy was the Antichrist because he was all suave, and then he got a bunch of people to follow him, and then, so that means here pretty soon we're going to be raptured. Hopefully everybody's ready, because we're going to get raptured because that guy over there fits my view of Revelation. And that has always happened in American history. I'm not so sure that that view was around before America, okay? Just personally, I'm not sure of that, and I could be totally wrong in that. Maybe it was around in Europe in like the 1500s, I don't know. But to me, it can only be a group of people who don't fully understand what tribulation means because you've not had to experience it, okay? So, that being said, if you look at the next two graphics on your page, when I was first introduced to these, it was difficult for me because I grew up with premillennialism. I grew up hearing that very movie-like view of Revelation. This very dramatic, there's the rapture, and there's this Antichrist over here, and there's a battle, and there's the tribulation, and it's very dramatic, very movie-like, of all these end-time things that have not happened yet. That's the key. Amillennialism, the reason that there's an there is because this view does not take the 1,000 years as literal. That's really kind of where that name comes from. That millennium where Satan is bound in prison and Jesus is sitting on a literal throne on this earth, ruling from Jerusalem. Okay, that 1,000 years. That's what this is all based on. The names, I should say. The names of these. Pre-millennialism, I think, means that we are currently living before the millennium. I think is how you would say that. That we are in the stage, not the tribulation, although some people think that, but we are in the stage before the millennium. There is a view called post-millennialism that I'm putting on the page because it gets really kind of difficult to understand. But the idea being that after Jesus resurrected, then he reigned for 1,000 years, and then something happened I'm not real sure about, and then somehow or other we're after that millennial reign. I don't know. It's weird. But it's all based on literal 1,000 years. That's the key. However, if you know anything about apocalyptic literature and know that in apocalyptic literature, 1,000 years means forever, okay? It means permanently. Now, take a look at it. Jesus rises from the dead. He ascends into heaven and he sits at the right hand of the Father. We know that. The Bible says that elsewhere. Again, put Revelation aside. We know that the Bible says that elsewhere. It says Jesus is right now sitting on the throne at the right hand of the Father. Okay? He is king, but at the same time, the Bible elsewhere also tells us the prince of the power of the air has been given a little bit of time to wreak havoc right now. He's called the prince of the power of the air. Satan is. Like, in other words, Satan he is kind of a king. He's a counterfeit king. He's not a true king, but he's a counterfeit king, and he is attempting in every way he possibly can to expand his kingdom, his counterfeit kingdom. He's attempting in every way he possibly can to put an end to God's kingdom, which we all know he can't do. And he even knows he can't do, but he's going to try to wreak as much havoc as he possibly can. This is called the overlapping kingdoms, or the overlapping ages. And it's kind of difficult to see on the bottom graphic down there. It gets kind of dark down there. But the overlap of the ages, okay? So basically, what happened is you got Adam and Eve, they sinned. They brought sin into the world. It broke the world to the point that you had people killing each other, and you also had hurricanes killing people, okay? All that stuff started happening when Adam and Eve sinned. They get kicked out of the garden. Everything right then was broken. Okay? Jesus comes back, and we all know that Jesus' death and resurrection and ascension did not put an end to the evil things people do to one another, right? We still are doing that. He actually rose from the dead and ascended to heaven, and yet we're all still killing each other. We're all sinning. We're all doing terrible things, and there are still natural disasters killing people. Okay? So, we know that there were bad things going on from the time that Adam and Eve sinned. After Jesus rose up to heaven, there's still bad things going on. Okay? So, that's kind of where you see that the darker period in that bottom graphic. Okay? You got the sin of Adam and Eve, and from that point until Jesus comes back for his second coming, all that time, Satan has he's on a leash, is the way I like to think of it. God's still in control, okay? But Satan is being allowed to do things. There are times I'm absolutely sure that God stops Satan from doing some things. We may not be able to see that, but I personally believe that's true. But either way, Satan, we all know, we can all admit that right now there's bad stuff going on. Satan is allowed to do some things, and all throughout history, ever since Adam and Eve sinned, Satan is being allowed to do those things, okay? That will continue, according to this view, the amillennialism view, that will continue until Jesus comes back. And the moment he comes back, that all stops. Satan doesn't get to get in one last hit after Jesus comes back. It's done. Okay? So, if you look in there, you have, down at the bottom, it says, Messiah comes. That means his birth. That means as a baby. That's what that's talking about. So, from that point, you have the newborn king. His kingship started there. Okay? As a baby, that's where he began his kingdom. And then, of course, we know that he rises up to heaven, and we have the church age that we're in now. So this is, God's kingdom on earth right now is within the church. And so you have this overlap. You have God's kingdom is expanding through the church. We're going out and we're telling people about Jesus, and we're, doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing when we're on mission. At the same time, Satan is doing as much as he possibly can. Both of these things go on until Jesus comes back. Okay? So the idea is that the 1,000 years that we read about in Revelation means the set amount of time, which is, for us, as we think about it, it seems like a lot, right? We know that it's been at least 6,000 years, let's say, okay? Since Adam and Eve sinned and until now. We know it's been at least 6,000 years, depending on who you talk to. I don't really care, millions of years, whatever. So, we know it's been a long time. The bottom line is, in apocalyptic literature, in Revelation, it's saying, when it says 1,000 years, it's meaning the set amount of time that God determined ahead of time. God said ahead of time, this is how much time is going to go between Adam and Eve's sin and when Jesus comes back to finally put an end to it all. Now here's the problem. How many times have you heard somebody say, well, I think it's going to be, well, right there, they're going to be wrong. Just in starting that sentence, if they say, I think it's going to be, based on whatever they think it is, based on whatever signs they think they see, based on no matter how close something happening in the world matches up with what they think they see in Revelation, if they say, I think it's going to be, they're wrong. How do I know that? Because Jesus said so. He said, nobody knows. I don't even know. Only God knows. Jesus actually said that. He said, only the Father knows. I don't know. You don't know. And that's not your concern. Okay? So that's where this is all based on. If there's anything, any view that can cause people to go, oh, I think it's going to be, then I don't particularly like that view. However, this particular view, the reason that I like it, and the reason I like to share it with people, is it makes me realize truly that Jesus could come back any moment. I'm not having to look around and try to go, well, there's that sign over there, and then there's going to be 7 years, and there's going to be this, and I don't have to do any of that stuff. I literally can live with the true belief, the honest belief that Jesus is going to come back right now. And therefore, what should I do? Therefore, how should I live? If I fully expect Jesus is coming back this very moment, I'm not looking for signs. As a matter of fact, in Matthew 24, Jesus said, don't worry about that stuff. You're going to hear of wars. You're going to hear of rumors of wars. You're going to hear about all that stuff. There's going to be people saying that I've come back. Believe me, I've not. You're going to know it. When I come back, you will know it. Everybody will know it. There's not going to be somebody around the world somewhere that's going to go, what was that noise? Everybody's going to know when Jesus comes back. Okay? This is why I like this view. Okay? Again, there are people that I dearly love and highly respect who are full-on premillennialists. I have nothing against them. We can debate. We can have fun. We can talk about it. I told you the other day, I went to lunch with a Baptist preacher, and we were talking about this very thing. Right? That's okay. As long as we know that it's not up to us, right? We know that it's all up to God. It's all in His hands. He's the one in charge. That's what matters. Okay? So, bottom line is we should be living like it is the end, like Jesus is coming back any minute. Okay. Now, are there any questions on that? Any questions on the different views? Premillennialism, amillennialism, any of that kind of stuff?
I would just say, be a raised Baptist. I've never bought into the premillennial view of it because of the fact that I've always believed and been taught that a God that could speak this world, this universe out of just speak and do whatever He wants, whenever He wants, and that we should always be prepared that He's coming back at any given moment. And I do struggle a bit with the number part of it.
Going back to what you were saying about John was very detailed in his use of numbers. So were all the other apocalyptic writings.
Well, and so I guess, and to follow that up a little bit, I mean, when the Bible tells me that Jesus fed 5,000, that I don't think it was 4,999 or 5,000. It could have been,
Right.
but I believe every word written was breathed by God. So it's 5,000, and I'm cutting it off right there. And then if he says it's 1,000 years, like I said, I don't know if it's his 1,000, and he says in the word, your thoughts are not my thoughts.
Yeah.
And we don't understand it, and there's going to be a lot of that. But I do agree that the God that created this earth, this universe, will do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. There does not have to be somebody sitting in a room, a bunch of monks sitting in a room going, all right, this hasn't happened, this hasn't happened, this has happened, this,
Right.
and we think it's going to be another few centuries before. Right. No, I never bought it.
Yeah, and it's funny because at the same time that we should be living like Jesus is going to come back this very instant, okay? Whatever works best for you to be on mission, to go out and do what God told you to do. Whether that means, because I think, in my mind, if I think Jesus is coming this very minute, it makes me want to just go sit here. I'm just going to sit here and wait, right? That's not what we're supposed to do. It says he's coming soon.
It's always done it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Monks are a good example. I mean, it's kind of what they're doing. They're just basically going to say, no, we're going to hole up. We're just going to wait here, and the rest of the world can go to pot. And we're just going to wait. But it says he's coming soon, right? So we should be living like whatever you want to say, tomorrow, 2 days from now, whatever works for you. At the same time, fully realizing that he may not come back for another 2,000 years, right? It doesn't matter. He said soon, and he means soon. And so, to go back to what you were saying, there are things in the Bible that we should take literally, right? And I believe soon we should take literally, even though we know that he was asking people right then to expect him to come back soon. And he's asking us today to come back soon. And if he doesn't come back for another 2,000 years, every person between now and then should be expecting him to come back soon. Every single person. Yeah, I understand.
So he comes sooner for us than he's going.
Right. But to go back to your taking things literally, I fully agree. There are absolutely places in the Bible that we definitely should take literally. Yes. However, there are places in the Bible that we probably shouldn't take literally. And always, just to have fun with this, I always ask the question, in Song of Solomon, do you take all those literally? Like when her hair was like a flock of goats, did it really look like a flock of goats? Like, Donna.
Hey, I've been raised church my whole life.
Right.
All I ever know to be taught was Jesus is coming back, done, that's it. I mean, did the churches not teach that? I don't remember every Revelation. And did they just not teach it?
One of the cool things about Church of Christ is they don't even bother with extra stuff. So I spent a lot of time in Church of Christ growing up. My dad was Church of Christ, and to the point that there are many Church of Christ who basically feel like you shouldn't even look at the Old Testament because it's been fulfilled, it's done. Right? That's their motivation behind that. They're like, we don't even need the Old Testament anymore. We got what we need. Now, obviously, there's a problem with that. I truly believe that's a serious problem. Jesus himself was quoting the Old Testament, and I feel like that's enough to tell us that we should go read it. But I get their heart. They are the ones during the Restoration movement. They were like, where the Bible speaks, we speak. Where it's silent, we're silent. And so it's just like all this view stuff of Revelation. Just forget that. Like we're not even gonna we know Jesus is coming back. That's all we're going to focus on. If we don't understand it, just put it over there somewhere. Let's do what we understand and let's move forward. I get that. I love that. I love that they're hard about that, right? Because I know that I could easily get into the weeds. I could get into this stuff, and I used to geek out about this stuff all the time. Like when I was a premillennialist, like I love sci-fi movies, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. Like a pale green horse is bringing death, and anyway. So Yeah, so that's honestly where I believe that comes from, is that the Church of Christ generally is just like, we don't want any extra stuff. Give us the basics, right? That's kind of the way I've always taken it from Church of Christ, kind of growing up there. I was actually baptized in a Church of Christ, and so it was kind of my upbringing, the non-instrumental thing. So, and then...
Well, we weren't non-instrumental. Church of Christ at home is the same as Christian churches here.
Yeah, and I know it's that way in, like, if you go up in Ohio, the Church of Christ and Christian church kind of flip-flopped, yeah.
Non-instrumental.
Right. Yeah. I grew up non-instrumental, and then I went on to play every instrument I possibly could get my hands on. Tammy. Tammy, do you have something?
Well, I was thinking a while ago, if we focus on the
Pre-mill. Yep.
we could spend too much time trying to figure out God, the whole just what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because we're too busy trying to find signs. And there are a couple places in the New Testament that say, if you've got some people in your church who are sitting around thinking about genealogies, right? They're worried about genealogies. They're trying to figure out. They're wasting their time. That's not what we're supposed to be about, right? Same thing with signs and stuff. Okay. Any other questions or comments on the? Yeah.
During the tribulation, are people not going to be saved during that?
So, according to the pre-mill view, most of the ones you'll talk to, I think they believe that they can. It kind of depends on who you talk to, of the people that believe that view, of kind of follow that view. It depends on who you talk to. That they'll either say, at the rapture, that's it, it's done, there's nobody else can be saved after that. But then there are others who say, no, that's God's final chance to really get people to believe in him and stuff like that. For me, the tribulation is now. We're in it. Everything that happened from Adam and Eve's sin until Jesus comes back, there's terrible things going on. And if you're a student of history, you know, like, you can go back and look at what some of the, like, tribal warfare throughout history, some of the awful, terrible, inhumane, horrific things that people have done to one another. Yeah? I mean, the whole idea behind the cross is because the Romans wanted to find the most excruciating thing that they could possibly find to kill somebody. Like, this is nothing new. The stuff that we see happening today, what Hamas is doing to Israel right now, they're beheading babies. They're capturing women and dragging them off, raping them, doing all kinds of terrible things. Right? We see that and we're like, any decent person is going to be like, what? I can't even fathom what would make somebody do that. It's because you're a decent person. Right? Because, anyway, there are lots of terrible things that have always happened. Awful, terrible, horrible things have always happened throughout history since Adam and Eve sinned. From that point until Jesus comes back, there are terrible things. And that's why my theory is that pre-mill is an American view, because America's young and and we've had it good. Okay?
So in this millennialism, where does the mark of the beast come into something like that? We're supposed to make sure we don't think that.
Here we go. Anybody else? We're getting into it. I promise. We'll go there. Anybody else? She was asking about the mark of the beast. So millennialism, what is it then? Any other questions? Because we're about to get into it. I think we've got some time. All right, everybody's just excited. Oh, no, here we go.
I've been to a lot of Bible studies for
Pre-mill.
Anyway, and one thing that never made sense to me was, as God's people, as the rapture would go up, and then he comes back down to his church, and then we have to live over there for 1,000 more years,
Right.
and then we go back up, and I mean, that never makes sense to me. I mean, but that's what they're saying, you know.
That's
I know, that never makes sense. Why would he pick us up and then we have to come back down?
yeah. We come back down and go, I just left this place. Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. I like that. That's pretty good. other questions, comments? All right. I want everybody to turn to Revelation chapter 13. And this is the point where I'm going to have a few people in here going, really? Like you've been teasing us about Revelation for 2 weeks, and you're skipping all the way to 13? Well, just hang on. Just hang on. I wanted to pick a chapter that has a lot of imagery in it that we have to kind of unpack. Okay? Now, this is the point where those of you that have been teasing me by walking in here wearing your sunglasses, this is where we're going to put on our sunglasses and try to look through the eyes of the very first readers. Okay? The very first people. Imagine that you are a Christian, 1st century AD, and you're like, I don't know what that possibly means. Well, basically, you are entirely controlled by Rome. The Emperor Domitian, okay, he's currently in power. He's currently reigning, as John has written this, has sent it on to the 7 churches that are listed, but then they sent the whole thing on around, okay? So all Christians are reading this. The Emperor Domitian controls everything, right? Rome controlled absolutely everything at that time. Domitian, like most Roman emperors at that time, believed that he's a god. And he fully expected everybody to worship him as God, and if they did not worship him as at least a god, then they could be killed. Well, naturally, Christians aren't going to go along with that, or shouldn't go along with that. There were many that did. There were many Christians who would go around saying, hey, come on, guys. You can say it. Like, you can say Domitian is Lord and God and not really mean it in your heart, right? I mean, that's what it's really about. It's really about what's in your heart. So you can just say Domitian is Lord and God. You can do all the little things he wants you to do and just not mean it in your heart. And it'll be okay. Then we won't die, right? And then we get to go on and we get to tell other people about Jesus. Isn't that great? So let's just do the little bitty things that our government is telling us to do, and then we can have more time to go tell people about Jesus. Let's not put our lives on the line for this. Mark of the beast. Okay? So the very first readers, that's going on. And so when Jesus is like, those who have not accepted the mark of the beast, basically saying, those who have not said, okay, yes, I believe in Jesus, but I'll take that one on too. That's the mark for them. But for every generation, every culture, there's going to be something else that Satan will tempt us to do to compromise. To compromise on our faith, compromise on our testimony. There's always going to be something. For all of history, for everybody. That's what Satan does. While he's got time, right now he's got a short time to go around and try to get people off mission. Try to get people away from Jesus. Try to get people to at least worship something plus Jesus. Or someone plus Jesus. Okay? If he can do that, that's absolutely against what Jesus said to do. Jesus is to be the one and only to you, right? When you're baptized, he's your Savior, but he's also your Lord. There's only one place for that. Remember Jesus talking about you can't serve me and money, right? You can replace money with anything. You can stick anything in there, okay? It's Jesus only. You only got room for one Lord in your life. Satan tries to convince us that we've got room for others to come in. And then he justifies it by saying, well, it's not really your Lord, you know. I mean, yeah, it's going to take you away from church for most Sundays, but it's not really your God, you know. You're not really worshiping it, even though it's making it so that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Okay? Chapter 13. We are 1st century Christians. We are under heavy persecution. The Emperor Domitian has had a newborn son who died while still young, and he then declared that son to be a god. and said, and he then had coins minted, okay? And I'll be showing, I think maybe this Sunday, I'll be showing some pictures of those coins that show a little baby sitting on top of the earth. The earth is round, by the way, in this picture. So they sitting on top of the earth and holding 7 stars in his hand, because he's, now a god, is what Domitian is declaring, okay? So this is who we're serving. There's also been many other emperors before this who have declared themselves to be God and they should be worshipped. Here we go. Chapter 13. I'm reading from the NIV, which I know is odd for me. The dragon stood on the shore of the sea. What does the sea represent in apocalyptic literature? The place where evil comes from. And we can all pretty much understand the dragon is not a good thing, right? We see a dragon and we're like, I don't know, it's a happy dragon, I don't think it's what was that movie? Pete's Dragon, there we go. Yeah, it's not like that kind of dragon, right? Or Never Ending Story. Although is that a dragon? It's kind of a dog, Anyway. So, the dragon stood on the shore of the sea, and I saw a beast coming out of what? The sea. It had 10 horns. 10 represents fullness, completeness, 2 handfuls. There were a lot of them, right? There were a lot of horns. But we'll just say 10. And what do horns represent? Kings. Okay. And 7 heads. 7 again being complete. Not incomplete, it's complete. With 10 crowns on its horns. To be honest with you, I don't remember which kind of crown this is. I'm pretty sure it's a diadem, like a king's crown. On its horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard, but had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like that of a lion. Okay, take a pause right there. If you get into Daniel chapter 7, okay, you can stick your finger here in Revelation 13, turn to Daniel chapter 7. We're not going to necessarily read it right now, but sometime at home, read through Daniel chapter 7 and compare it to that sentence I just read. Daniel 7, specifically verses 1 through 8 and 23 to 25. He describes 4 beasts. And it just so happens that those 4 beasts resemble this one beast. Now, if you study through Daniel, which we'll do sometime, but if you study through Daniel, Daniel was specifically writing about kingdoms that were both in power at the time and that were soon coming to power. But the whole message was, don't worry, God's still in control. Those kingdoms will not last forever. One's going to destroy another, another is going to destroy another, and eventually the Messiah is coming. Because in Daniel chapter 7 is where you read, I saw the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Then Jesus comes along and Jesus says, the Son of Man, literally talking about himself, and the Pharisees were like, how dare you? We read Daniel chapter 7. We know that he was talking about the Messiah. How dare you call yourself the Son of Man? That is to be reserved for one person. And Jesus says, you're right, me. All right, here we go. The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, the dragon is Satan. Satan gave the power to this evil emperor. He was evil. And at the time, it was Domitian in power. I just gave it away, didn't I? We're talking about Domitian. Talking about the Roman emperor. This beast that came up with the crowns and the horns and the heads and all this other kind of stuff, to the first Christians who were reading this, who understood apocalyptic literature, they knew immediately what he meant. They knew he was talking about Rome. Because they had also studied Daniel, and it turned out, it actually says in there, Daniel's talking about this kingdom, that kingdom, it's talking about all this kind of stuff, and I'm just showing you a really cool way to understand all this. No, and so he's talking about the kingdom of Rome. Now, what ended up happening to Rome is you had all these different emperors, right? Every single emperor that came up in charge declared himself to be better than the one before, right? That's kind of how that goes, right? The new emperor that comes up, he declares himself to be better than the one before. He may have been a god, but I'm really a god, right? And so, he is gone now. He clearly died. I'm here, so now you should worship me, right? I'm the only person that matters, so you should worship me. So you've got these crowns, you've got these horns represent kings or people in power. You got these different heads, complete heads. Now, here's where the completeness comes in. We all know, because of history, that there was a time when Rome was no more. Meaning that, like, the empire, right? Like, Rome is still around. But anyway, so we know that the empire was no more. There was a time when the empire that literally controlled the world came to an end. Think about that. Think about the people who were suffering under the persecution of the Roman Empire. They were the most powerful empire in the world. And really, they were the most powerful empire that had been up until that point. They were going around and taking over every land that they could find and doing it easily. And all the while making people believe that they were doing it for peace. Right? We're coming in to take over, invade you, control you for peace. We're coming to give you peace. Right? So, imagine that. Imagine that you're first century Christians. This empire that seems to have no bounds in its power, in its control, and you're constantly seeing people that you know getting killed for their faith in Jesus by this empire. And this empire is going around and taking over every land that you can find. You know that those Christians had to be struggling with some doubt. They had to be struggling with, is this empire, is this it? Are they always going to be in power? Are they always going to be in control? Are we always going to have this problem? Will the church always have to be suffering under the Roman Empire? No. 7 heads. There's a complete number of heads. It doesn't mean that these heads will go on forever. There's also a view that says that Rome sat on 7 hills, and anyway. But this is the idea that we're supposed to get from this. Rome may seem like a never-ending, all-encompassing, evil power. But God is saying, just in the simple phrase, by saying that there are 7 heads, it means that they're finite. There's an end. God has established when they started and when they're going to end, which means they will come to an end. Now, they may come to an end because Jesus comes back, or they may come to an end because some other country comes to power and takes over and beats them and all that kind of stuff. The point is, God is in control, and He has set ahead of time the dimensions, the time, the amount. He's got it all in His hands. So no, this kingdom, this empire that is controlling you, that is persecuting you, that's doing all these terrible, horrible things, it will not last forever. That's the key. Okay? Now, you then take that message and you can apply it to whatever you want in this world. Anything that you look at right now and you're like, how long can this go on? I just can't believe that people would do that kind of thing. I can't believe that this horrible, terrible thing would happen. And really what we're saying is, will this ever come to an end? Will there ever be a day when I won't turn on the news and see the stuff that I'm seeing? And the answer is yes. This is yes. You can look around right now and you can pick whatever you want and you can say it's a beast that has come up out of the sea. It's had kings in charge. It's had whatever in charge, all this kind of stuff. It's done terrible things. It's persecuted Christians. It's done all kinds of evil. Will it ever come to an end? Yes, it will. It'll either come to an end when Jesus returns, or it'll come to an end because another kingdom's going to come up and take it over and then it'll become the next thing until Jesus returns. Okay? So that's the whole point of apocalyptic literature, is to remind Christians that this world is temporary. Even though the things you're facing seem like they're not. The things you're facing seem like they're never going to end. The things you're facing, the people that you see doing terrible things, it seems like it just keeps going and it's never going to stop. The message of Revelation is, be patient and endure. Because this world's not your home. right? This world is not going to last long at all. When it comes to an end, when this world comes to an end, Jesus comes back and we're all in heaven with him, we're going to be able to look back and say, wow, that was really short. I mean, honestly. We can't say that now. I mean, it's difficult to say now. To say that, oh yeah, this life is short. The bad stuff is not going to last long. It's difficult to say that now. But when we're in heaven, we're going to be able to say, yeah, you're right, God. That was short. Because then we're going to be in eternity at that point. All right, moving on. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. What do you think that means?
Harry wants to know.
Any ideas?
They thought they were following somebody that should be dead, but he was alive.
Okay. You're getting down the right track here, but who could it be? Yeah, I did.
They're following Jesus.
And the beast that I saw sitting in the wicked, but his feet were like those
There you go.
of a bear, and his mouth was like the lion.
Well, so you're actually getting very, very close. Very close. So what this is, there's something called Nero Redivivus, which means Nero lives again. You see, Emperor Nero was terrible. He was one of the worst. I told you before, a while back on a Sunday, that Nero was famous for his garden parties because his garden parties were lit up at night by Christians lit on fire. He would strap Christians to poles and light them on fire. Okay? And then he would have garden parties while they burned. So, that was Nero. And that was just the smallest of stuff that he did. Okay? Well, he ends up dying, because he's not God and he's human. He dies, but then there was this thing that would go around where it was like there was emperor worship, as I said. People literally worshipped whoever the emperor was. It was a cult. Okay, it was an organized religion that worshipped the current emperor. That organized religion, in order to worship the current emperor, usually part of their worship was doing all kinds of terrible things that we don't like to talk about in public. Okay, if you get my drift. So, this emperor worship cult, they loved Nero, right? He was special to them. So when he died and a new emperor came up, there was a whole section of these emperor worshipers, this whole cult, kind of hung on to Nero. The rest of them just kind of went, okay, Nero's dead, let's move on. But there was a group of them. They kind of formed their own little cult, and they worshiped Nero, and they kind of hung on to him. And then they started spreading a rumor that Nero had been resurrected from the grave. And it was called Nero Redivivus. It became the thing that they would say. Like Christians were running around saying, Jesus is alive. They were running around saying, Nero's alive. Now, they couldn't substantiate it. There were no actual true witnesses who could prove it, whereas there were hundreds of people that saw Jesus after he walked out of the grave. There was nobody that saw Nero walking around, but they still did it. They went around saying, Nero's alive. All these Christians running around doing it, they're getting a good following. Let's try it ourselves. Nero Redivivus. Now let's read. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was filled with wonder and followed the beast. That's Nero Redivivus. Now, here's something fun. I debated in my mind whether I wanted to talk about this or not, but I'm going to because I'm a glutton for punishment. So, there are people who, usually following around the premillennialist view, but in some of the offshoots that get into some of the really interesting views of Revelation, who believe that the Nero Redivivus thing is actually something that is going to happen again, literally about Nero. That Nero, who was a terrible, horrible, anti-Christian guy, is going to come back to life as the Antichrist. Ta-da! There's your guy that raises up to power and has a whole bunch of people following him and all that kind of stuff and leads us into tribulation or whatever. There are people who believe that Nero is going to come back to life as the Antichrist. I'm just, again, I wasn't sure I wanted to talk about it, but there is. All right, moving on. People worshipped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast, and they also worshipped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can wage war against it? If the beast is Rome, there were plenty of people saying, who's like Rome and who could possibly wage war against Rome? Okay? And notice it says people were worshiping the dragon because the dragon gave authority to the beast. All authority that Rome had was given to them by Satan. Satan was controlling Rome. Rome thought they were the ones controlling it all. And so people were worshiping Rome, but they were actually worshiping the dragon, who is Satan. Okay? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise its authority for 42 months. Okay, 42 months. Somebody, one of you math people out there, tell me how many years that is. 3.5. 3.5 years. What's 3.5 times 2? 7. If 7 means complete, what do you think 3.5 might mean? It means I walked up to you with a pie pan and half a pie in it. You look at it and you say, that ain't all of it. Right? There's still half a pie somewhere. You either ate it yourself or you kept it at home to eat it later or something, but there's half a pie somewhere. You're cheating me. You're only coming at me with half a pie. This 3.5, 42 months, this is God saying, this isn't even going to be close to forever, what this beast is doing. And really, those of us that now are where we are, we can look back on history and go, yeah, that whole Roman thing didn't last very long, did it? Right? So it doesn't mean literally 42 months. It doesn't mean literally 3.5 years, because we know that Rome lasted longer than 3.5 years. But if we're looking at it through the eyes of apocalyptic literature, and we know that 3.5 is half of complete, it means it's not even like 6, right? Where 6 is just not there. It's 3.5. It's not going to be long. It seems like it, but it's not. I hand you half a pie. It might fill you up, but it's just not a whole pie, right? If you want to give me a pie, even if it's half a pie, I'll take it. It's okay. You can do that. Okay, so don't be afraid to give me half a pie later. It won't bother me. Joyce. All right. It opened its mouth to blaspheme God and slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. It was given power to wage war against God's holy people and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Again, think Rome, because at the time, if we're looking at this through the eyes of the first century Christians, this is Rome. Okay? So let's see. All inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all whose names have not been written in the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. That's Jesus. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity they will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword they will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of God's people. That little thing there, that little what looks like a poem, it's probably broken down in your Bible and kind of shaped where if anyone is to go into captivity and go, if anyone is to be killed with the sword, they will go. There's a reason that is separated like that, because it was basically John interjecting and saying, listen, life will go on. Just because you see Rome doing these terrible things, and it probably is going to get worse. Okay? You've had Nero, right now you've got Domitian. There's probably going to be more emperors coming before Rome comes to an end. Right? But things are going to happen. If you're going to go into captivity, that's what you're going to do. If you're going to be killed with a sword, that's what you're going to do. This is basically them pointing back to what Jesus said in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, where he says, you're going to hear about wars, rumors of wars. You're going to hear people saying, here I am, I'm the Messiah, I've come back. Don't pay attention to that stuff. So basically he's saying, look, history is going to go on, life is going to go on, terrible things are going to happen. But those things don't signal that Jesus has come back. Those things don't signal anything special. Okay? This is just how it's going to go. That's kind of what that is. There is one other thing here. Let's see. Yeah, let's keep going here real quick. I think we can finish it. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose fatal wound had been healed. Remember Nero? And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Okay. Ready for this? This was, when I learned about this was like extremely eye-opening to me. Because I didn't know this. During all of this, when first century AD, when Rome was the power, and emperor worship was the thing, like it was the current trend, it's what everybody was doing, there would be statues of the current emperor, okay? Also statues of the old emperors, right? And so we had this Nero cult that was running around doing its thing. But anyway, so one of the things that would happen is that there would be certain times of the day, or when a certain song would be played, that probably sounds familiar to you, when a certain song would be played, people would have to bow down and worship the image of the beast, meaning the statue, okay? Which was true. That was happening. That would, as the day would go on, there were certain times of the day, certain things would happen or whatever. You were supposed to bow down and worship the beast right then and there. Worship the emperor, the statue of the emperor, if you were close to one, or turn and face one, or whatever. Well, naturally, Christians wouldn't do that, right? And if they wouldn't do it, they get dragged off to jail at least. So, this is supposed to happen. Well, naturally, it's just a statue, right? Like, Christians were going, guys, don't you see that this is just a metal statue or concrete or whatever it's made of? Like, it's just a statue. Why would we sit here and do this, guys? So then, there were people who were magicians, illusionists, okay, who would come and stand next to the statue, clothed as if they were just a regular person, going about their day, there to worship the statue. They were illusionists, and they would do things that would make the statue look like it was actually doing something. This really happened. This is actually what happened, okay? So they were basically priests in the emperor worship cult. And the reason that they were priests in the emperor worship cult is because they were illusionists and because they could perform signs and wonders by the statues, which would then cause people to go, oh, maybe this is real. Maybe I should bow down and worship this statue. Look at it. Like fire just shot up out of this thing. That was actually happening. Now, knowing that, imagining that you're a first century Christian, and you know that kind of stuff's going on. You see it every day. You walk past it every single day that you have to walk through the marketplace. You see these statues that just yesterday had fire shooting out of it, and you know that it's really just these illusionists. These other people around here are just amazed by it, and they think it's something completely special, and therefore they worship it, but you know the truth. You then get this letter from John, and you read that. You read that there was a beast who spoke like the dragon, but he represented the first beast, and he caused people to worship the beast. See what I'm saying? When I learned that was one of the keys where I was just like, okay, now I see that there is something we can gain by reading this through the eyes of the first readers. Okay? Any questions?
So when you talk about first century readers as well,
Yep.
take that to 21st century, what do you make of the United Nations headquarters in New York having Daniel's depiction of the beast right outside of it?
Sure. And see, that's my thing. So we could do that. To me, somebody could take that and say, there's our current beast, dragon, whatever. Like, and line it up with this. The difference is, if you start doing that, and then you go, okay, because I believe that, this comes next, that's where it goes wrong. All we should say that comes next is that will come to an end. Regardless, whatever it is. Like, you could just put anything in the blank. Anything that you believe is anti-God, anti-church, anti-Christian, anti-Christ, which, by the way, John himself in another letter said, the Antichrist is here, there are many. There are plenty of antichrists. There are plenty of people who are antichrist and are going to try to shut down the church. So you can put whatever you want in that blank. The whole point of Revelation is patiently endure, because that will come to an end, whatever it is. That's going to come to an end, whether Jesus comes back and puts it to an end, or eventually it won't be in power and somebody else will be in power until Jesus comes back. So that's what I would make it. But I do think if that's the case, I think that should tell us something. Like, I'm not even aware of what you're talking about, but if there's, like, they literally made a beast look like Daniel's beast, it's stuck in the middle, I think that should probably tell us something. Anyway. Anything else? Questions? Comments? Rude remarks? Jerry? Yeah. Hey, if you win the lottery, who told you? All right, nothing else? All right, let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you, God, that you are in control. Because, God, it's easy for us to see evil going on in the world and forget and get sidetracked and get distracted from what it's supposed to be about, what we're supposed to be about. But, God, we pray that you would use this time studying Revelation just above all, regardless of what view we decide to take on it, that the bottom line is that we are ready, because you tell us to be ready for Jesus to come back, and also to constantly be worshiping you, loving you, and bringing others to you. And so, Father, we pray that you would help us to stay on that mission. God, remind us all the time, especially when we see stuff going on that just completely shocks us or disheartens us, just makes us wish that the end would come soon. God, help us to use that to be even more ready, to just be even more spurred on to bring light into darkness, to go find the ones that don't know about you and just tell them who you are and how much you love them. So, God, be with us as we leave here. We thank you for this time, and it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
said to row in front of the next row. I just need one on this one. Watch here, we're not here. I always go all the way to the corner right there. Or right there, 5. I'll step it. That way you don't get to the back, you gotta double on the clear. We're leaving. Before the